This is T.O. Jones. His back is facing the camera, and he was born in Memphis in 1922. C. Eric Lincoln, an African American scholar, once said, "Psychologically, Memphis has always been in Mississippi. Its presence in Tennessee is a geographical accident. To this day, a statue dedicated to Nathan Bedford Forrest stands in the downtown area. This is the same man who sold slaves to amass his fortune, massacred hundreds of Union soldiers, and created the Ku Klux Klan." When T.O. Jones was born, Memphis was controlled at the time by E.H. Crump, known as the big dog of Memphis politics. He had built his machine by collecting money from illegal gambling dens, houses of prostitution, and illegal liquor joints during Prohibition, and using those funds to pay for people's poll taxes and vote for his ticket. Crump would rule Memphis with an iron fist from 1920 to his death in 1954. T.O. Jones grew up on the north side of Memphis, where he went to Douglas High School, but dropped out to join the Navy before he graduated. After his term of service, he went to work on a shipyard in Oakland, California, but after a recession took his job, he returned home in 1959. He got married, began having children, and took a job in the sanitation department of the City of Memphis Public Works Office. The man who ran the sanitation department, Henry Loeb, had little in common with Mr. Jones. Loeb was born to a Jewish family in Memphis. His parents ran a laundry service, and a young Henry had attended Phillips Academy and then went on to graduate from Brown University. He was friends with John F. Kennedy, and like the former president, they both served on patrol boats during World War II. Despite growing up Jewish, Loeb easily connected with the white Christian upper echelons of Memphis society and eventually married Mary Gregg, the 1950 queen of the Memphis Cotton Carnival. When he first ran for city commission in 1955, many African Americans supported his campaign, hoping that a Jew would be more sympathetic to their cause. Loeb was elected and assigned to run the Public Works Department. He quickly transformed the office and worked tirelessly to improve the sanitary conditions of the city and made sure everyone knew his accomplishments. He was known to dictate 100 letters a day and quickly earned the nickname Hurricane Henry. The hurricane's steady work habits did not make him any more accommodating to his African American workers. Always trying to avoid union organizing, Loeb often hired African Americans with arrest records who were unlikely to organize, held down wages, and brought the cheapest trucks that led to frequent accidents. When Loeb ran for mayor, he established himself as a segregationist and converted to his wife's Episcopalian religion. When Jones returned to his hometown, Loeb had distanced himself from his Jewish roots and had received only 2% of African American votes in 1959. Jones joined a department that treated its African American workers, who made up a majority of the workforce, with little to no respect. The average wage was $1.80 an hour, making it nearly impossible to not take federal housing subsidies. There were no benefits, and when there were injuries on the job that disabled the worker, families received little to no compensation. James Lawson, a civil rights leader, would later go on to tell the Memphis garbage workers, "You are human beings, you are men, you deserve dignity." The idea of the I Am Man slogan is rooted in the Negro spirituals when slave preachers told people, "You're not a slave, you're a man. You're not birthed for slavery, you were birthed for liberty and truth." It did not take Jones long to observe the plight and desperation of his situation, and he was determined to convince his peers that they deserved better. They called themselves the Independent Workers Association, IWA, and in 1963 began to demand better conditions. But Mayor Loeb would not budge. He refused to negotiate with the union, and the city's white elites were afraid that a concession would lead to a domino effect, and all of the other cities' poorly treated African American workers would demand the same level of respect. The city began to send informers into the IWA meetings, and eventually 33 people, including Jones, were fired. African American civic leaders pleaded that the city rehire the men, which they did, but accepted none of their union demands. Despite having little money for his family, Jones decided to not return if the conditions were not going to change. For the next few years, Jones continued to organize, and in 1966, the U.S. Department of Labor signed an exclusive union contract with its employees. Jones felt it was the right time to pull in a national group, and he asked Memphis Labor Council Director Bill Ross if he could find an international union to support the local. Ross turned to Jerry Worf, who was president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Jerry Worf grew up Jewish on the Lower East Side of New York City during the Depression. He suffered from polio and had chronic health problems throughout his life. From the 30s throughout the early part of the 60s, Worf championed the labor movement and supported Martin Luther King during the Montgomery bus boycotts and subsequent efforts. When he took over AFSCEME in 1964, the union was bureaucratic and very government dependent. The union also followed the rules of Jim Crow, but Worf, not satisfied with the bigotry of the status quo, recruited the growing number of Puerto Rican, Jews, Catholic, and African American workers to join the union, which rooted out the segregationists. Worf said, in many respects, this union was uniquely prepared to deal with the very difficult problems that existed in Memphis around the issues of race. In 1966, after being approached by Ross and Jones, Worf helped the Memphis garbage workers strike in the summer of '66. While the timing helped, the workers could not build a coalition with enough African American middle-class citizens and white working-class citizens. By the end of '66, workers were still in the same position they found themselves at the beginning of the year. In the spring of 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. began to speak more openly against the Vietnam War and about the economic injustices that were occurring across the country. In a speech on April 4, 1967, a year before his death, he said, "We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-orientated society to a person-orientated society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered." While Jones and Worf's efforts to organize continued to be thwarted by the mayor and King's focus became the Poor People's Campaign, the garbage workers were still without equal and fair pay. On February 1, 1968, Echo Cole and Robert Walker, two Memphis City garbage workers, found shelter from the rainstorm in the sanitation division's Wiener barrel trucks. The rain belt down, but Cole and Walker were stuck inside a truck that contained yard waste, dead chickens, and moldy food. The smell was atrocious. At the end of the working day, Cole and Walker rode in the precarious part of the truck between the hydraulic ram used to mash the garbage and the wall of the truck's container. The crew chief drove the truck and heard the ram go into action. When he pulled the truck over, the ram was already jamming the two men. They could not escape and died immediately. The city offered an insurance policy of $2,000, but the two workers could not afford it. They were also listed as unclassified hourly employees, and the state's compensation program did not cover them. The city gave their families 1 month's salary and $500 for each man, but the burial expenses of $900 used that up. Less than 2 weeks later, 1,300 black men in the Memphis Department of Public Workers went on strike. The city normally handled 2,500 tons of garbage every day, but on February 11th, they handled less than a tenth of that. The garbage worker strike is the setting in which Michael Honey writes Going Down Jericho Road. It is a story about the machine politics of a southern city, King's shift from civil rights to a focus on the Poor People's Campaign, and most importantly, how a few people, like T.O. Jones, who have now faded into obscurity, bravely stood up for the rights of workers.